I also have my list of people who have harmed me. And it is just as crucial for me, if I am going to recover, that I forgive all of them.
I can do all the apologizing I want. I can talk about all the problems that I have, all the issues in my life. If I'm not willing to make changes, then it's all pointless. It's all empty words.
To be able to simply say, I'm sorry, and then take whatever comes from them, which sometimes is, I am not ready to forgive you yet.
This program is the 9th in a series of 12 in-depth conversations between George Mann and Dick Rice. They've walked the 12 steps of AA, have studied scripture, and have personal stories to share with you about their walk to a deepened spirituality and greater wholeness. Dr. George Mann is the medical director of St. Mary's Chemical Dependency Services in Minneapolis. Father Dick Rice is the director of Loyola's Spiritual Direction Center in St. Paul, Minnesota.
If we have a need to ask forgiveness, we also have a need to forgive. And it's that I would like to anticipate with this. We're in the 6th chapter now of Matthew's Gospel. Jesus is speaking. This is how you are to pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Forgive us the wrong we have done, as we forgive those who wrong us. If you forgive the faults of others, your heavenly Father will forgive you yours. If you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive you.
The 9th step talks about two things. It talks about making amends, and it talks about the possibility of injuring others. What this step is really talking about is the issue of justice and how we can live out justice and how important that is to our own growth and development. The 9th step says, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
So we move from the list of those we have harmed, we move from the willingness to make amends, and now we're making direct amends to others. I want to stay with that word amends, George, as we move into this 9th step, just so we understand that we're not making up for lost time. We're not doing what we didn't do at the time. It's basically apology, and from now on I will try to treat you as you deserve. Is that right? Is that your understanding of amends?
And I think that the key difference between the 8th step and the 9th step is that the 8th step is obviously a preparatory step. It is becoming willing. And the 9th step is when we actually do it. And I think that talking about how amends can be made, both directly and indirectly, we've now decided who we're going to make amends to. Now, how do we go about doing it? How do we begin to make amends to ourselves? How do we make amends to our families? How do we make amends to co-workers? How do we make amends to those people who we can't make amends to? The implied in here, of course, is when we say that we will make direct amends wherever possible, except to those where making direct amends would be harmful. Then to those where making direct amends would be harmful, the implication is that we will make indirect amends. So we have to begin to see the difference between direct and indirect amends. You talked about apologizing. True. How specific are we with that apology? Say one member of a married couple has had problems with fidelity, has had an affair. The other person is not aware of that affair. What does it do to that person to say, to give them all the details and say, here's what I've done, and I'm making amends? How harmful would that be to the relationship? How harmful would that be to the person? I think that one of the one of the basic precepts of spiritual growth and development is that we do not injure one another, that we maintain harmony. I think the other side to that, of course, is that that can be used as a cop-out. We have to be very careful, where I say, well, I've injured this person, but if I tell them about the injury, I'm going to do them harm. And so as that list we developed, we can whittle that down fairly effectively by deciding, well, this would be harmful to this person, this would be harmful to that person, and so we may end up not making amends to anyone.
Yes, and I find that it is so easy to spare myself. I claim that I want to spare the others, so I won't make direct amends. But really what I'm trying to do is avoid any intimacy and really spare myself the pain that it might be of apologizing and then committing myself to be different in the relationship. So I find the criteria for myself as to whether or not I'm called to make direct amends or indirect are, what would be more loving for myself? What would be more loving for the other and for the relationship that we have? Would it be to make a direct amends? Would it be to make indirect amends? I find the same thing you say. On the one hand, there's a certain drive to be exposing of everything. I would want to reveal everything and make amends for everything. On the other hand, there's kind of still a drive to keep it all covered. Well, I'll spare her this. I won't tell him that. I do have criteria that are spirited for me. But then I find I still have to usually speak of it within the group. And I really need the discerning of a group that wants nothing more than my own recovery to help me decide when direct amends are appropriate and when indirect amends are appropriate.
I think it's important to also recognize that we are talking here again about a process, and that is to apologize, to do something directly is one form of direct amends making, but how I change my life, how I treat you in the future is also very direct amends making. Apologizing does not give me the excuse to go back tomorrow and begin my old behavior. I have to change my life, and I have to change my whole attitude, and that's what amends making is really about. How I can best make amends, both directly and indirectly, is an ongoing change in how I behave toward you. I think there's a very sound principle that I use in counseling all the time, and that is, it's not what the person says, it's what the person does. The old saying, actions speak louder than words. I can do all the apologizing I want. I can talk about all the problems that I have, all the issues in my life. If I'm not willing to make changes, then it's all pointless. It's all empty words. Now, the other thing that I think is very important in this thing for growth is that if we would ask sort of the generic question, why would someone not want to make amends? What would be the attitude of someone who chooses or who would choose to not make amends? And we're back to our old issue of pride. There is nothing that we do that is more humbling in the good sense of the word, keeping our feet planted on the ground, than to look another person right in the eye and say, I'm sorry, I've injured you, I have harmed you. I want to make it up to you. I will treat you better in the future. The more pride that I have, the more I see myself as the center of the universe, the more I see you as an object, the more I see you as something to be used, the more unlikely it is that I will do anything in the area of amends making that is real. The proud person will make amends as a way of manipulating the other person. If I can manipulate you by amends making and maintain my level of pride around it, then I take the whole thing and I turn it around into a pathological, sick process.
I can always test out my humility by my ability to simply say, I'm sorry, and to say it just that nakedly without trying to explain myself, without trying to rationalize myself, without trying to blame someone else, and without trying to manipulate the response of the other. To be able to simply say, I'm sorry, and then take whatever comes from them, which sometimes is, I am not ready to forgive you yet.
There is the tough one. The individual who has gone through a fourth step and a fifth step and a sixth step and has come to the point of all this recognition and insight and comes to the point of direct amends making, and the person turns them down and says, I'm not going to forgive you for those things. I have been injured so deeply and so profoundly by your behavior that I'm not able to forgive you. And then what happens to that person? How much of the old behavior then surfaces? How much of the resentment? How much anger? How much bitterness? How much ego comes back into it?
Pray God, I'm recovering enough at that point. And it's why I think this step is so far along that I can fall back on the first step and say, I am powerless over their response. She might not be ready to forgive me yet, but I have done what I could do to work the step.
I think you just touched on a very important point, that this step is toward the end of the 12 steps. And that says that much work has been done, should be done, before people even attempt this step.
Before they even attempt to say, I'm sorry to one another. I found when it came to direct amends to myself, it's kind of funny, the list of activities and behaviors that I've changed in making direct amends to myself. For years, caught up in the alcoholism in the family, I had pretty well become a workaholic, and now I see I have amends to make to myself. Well, that has meant more rest than ever before. That's meant a day off every week. That's meant more careful exercise than ever before. That's meant keeping my prayer much more careful than ever before. It's meant being much more careful to eat my meals slowly and with those I really want to have a meal with. It's meant a number of other things as well, but much more care with my friendships and being true to my friends and the people I want to go on with. I can begin to understand after 6 years now or so of getting those one by one in place in my own life, wanting to keep working this step and make direct amends to myself, that within the pride that blocks people from the direct amends is also just a realization that my life is going to change considerably if I really begin making direct amends to any of those who are on my list, and particularly if I find myself on my list.
So what you're saying then is making amends to yourself is taking care of yourself, is good caretaking. And you didn't say this, but good caretaking very often produces criticism of that caretaking by other people. If you're a good priest, you don't take a day off every week. You give your life to your vocation, and that kind of, quote, selfish behavior is unacceptable.
I'm sure a number of people see me not nearly as generous as I was 10 years ago.
And that's, you know, that's a whole part of that whole risk-taking of going out on a limb to say, these are the things that I need to do to take care of myself. This is part of the amends making. Part of the whole process of amends making, directly and indirectly, is that you change your relationships. You're more self-revealing, you're more direct, you're more confrontive, you're all the things that you weren't before are tied up in those kinds of changes. As we move beyond the 9th step, we begin to talk very specifically about prayer, meditation, some of those kinds of things that haven't been mentioned in the steps before. The 9th step is kind of the last chance, the last level in the 12 steps of doing the things necessary to get ready to really take those last 3 giant steps in spiritual growth and development.
Yes, you heard me speak of the criteria I use in deciding when direct or indirect amends is appropriate, when the spirit is really moving toward one or the other. Are your criteria any different than mine?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they're very clear. I think one of the things that I'd like to get back to for a couple of minutes is that the whole issue of the reversal of that and the willingness to receive amends. It's a two-way street. As I said earlier, I don't think there's any person who reaches adolescence or adulthood who at some level or another has not injured someone else. Conversely, I don't think there's any one of us who have not been injured in some way. And again, we're talking here about pride. That is my ego so invested in myself. It's my ego so tender that any injury to me is an unforgivable injury. It's a very difficult thing if you've been wounded deeply and someone comes to you and says, I am very sorry for having wounded you, particularly if you have nursed that wound, held it to you dearly, cultivated it, done all the things to make it into a chronic, open, bleeding wound. And then someone gives you an opportunity to heal that. And one of the responses that you may make almost instinctively is, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. There's an elderly couple that I was acquainted with who fought constantly. They kept those wounds bleeding all the time. It came to the point that the primary function of each of them was to keep the wound open. The relationship was based on bleeding, on anger, on resentment, on pain. When one of the married couple died and the other one did not have that person to vent their anger on, to take out their resentment, they died very shortly.
I'm not surprised. When I've dealt with people like a young woman whose father had been alcoholic for years and had virtually neglected her in growing up, I found she was very resistant to forgiving him. Even though, just like you and me and most of us, she was a woman whose central prayer was the Our Father. When it came to forgiving this key person in her life, she couldn't do it. She prayed day after day, forgive us to the extent that we forgive others. And I would remind her that and try to bring home to her that she had to forgive by her own words. Finally, she was in such pain that she was able to move to forgiving him. though he was dead now. And the way that she did it was she had to acknowledge the fact that she had been very gifted and graced through him. She had to acknowledge further the fact that she had really suffered. She had to acknowledge further the fact that it was very understandable the way her father was, and he was just suffering from what he had inherited within his family, that the disease of alcoholism had run throughout the family. She had to appreciate as well that great good had been worked right through the illness of alcoholism, that she would not be the nurse that she is today with the sensitivity that she has to people if she hadn't known suffering so personally herself. When she could see all of that and work through all of that, she was ready to forgive him. And I find that this 8th and 9th step, as you've played these last minutes, both sides of those steps are crucial. I might have to make amends, and I might have a list of people that I've harmed. I also have my list of people who have harmed me. And it is just as crucial for me, if I am going to recover, that I forgive all of them, directly or indirectly, as that I ask the forgiveness of everyone that I've harmed.
One of the most profound experiences that I had occurred on the day that Hubert Humphrey died. I had watched the cancer progress in Hubert Humphrey primarily on the television. I had seen him becoming more and more emaciated, sicker and sicker. This ebullient, happy, wonderful person went downhill as his cancer advanced. And on the day he died, I became aware of his death over the lunch hour. I went out and I heard the radio in my car say that Hubert Humphrey had died. I came back from lunch, and my first appointment after lunch was with a woman who came into my office and talked in great detail of how she hated her husband, how she hated her children, filled with resentment and venom. As I reflected on the two of them, it became very clear to me that this woman was sicker than Hubert Humphrey, who had just died. I can recall that very clearly. It affected me very profoundly. And what you speak of, what we are speaking of now, is so critically important for the health and for the recovery of all of us who are so good at nursing resentments and hanging on to them and rejecting people who make overtures to reconcile with us.
Jesus knew what he was speaking of when he said, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." I would like to close this step, George, with a prayer that I use frequently for myself and people that I'm working with when they're dealing with resentments, when they're dealing with either the need to be forgiven or the need to forgive. It comes from the Buddhist tradition. So again, I go to the East, as we've done frequently in this series, for wisdom. It reads simply like this: "My Lord, if whoever has in any way injured me, I forgive her. If I have injured her in any way, I ask forgiveness. May she be joyful. May she be peaceful. May she be free of pain and suffering. May she be liberated. May she live in loving kindness. I ask all of this through our living God. Amen." It's virtually an Oriental version of the Serenity Prayer, put in terms of forgiveness given and received.
I think the only thing we can say after that, after the Lord's Prayer, is that as we look at the things that must be done, if growth, if spirituality, if recovery mean anything to ourselves, is the freedom, the ability to forgive and to be forgiven.
Forgive each other we must. We've taken another step.
Thank you, brother.
I'd like to go on with you. Thank you.